There we go. Okay. Now, chapter 20, right? The immune system. We're going to talk about the immune system tonight, okay? Now, first the definition, pathogen. Pathogen, right? Pathogen is harmful or disease-causing microorganisms, right? Something that causes us to have problems. Pathogenic, it'll cause a disease. Doctor that studies and figures out, right, what you died of is a pathologist, right? Yes? Did you hear Lake Mead? They found another in the last 2 months. They found a third set of human remains. And they're like, well, the pathologist is going to have to tell us what the cause of death was. Yeah, good luck on that one, huh? Right? Buried under Lake Mead for years. Anyway, okay. Let's talk about the immune system, okay? We split the immune system into two big broad categories, and one is innate, okay? Innate, yes? Now, innate is another term. We could use the term inborn, right? Okay? Think about this. Have you ever been around a 2-year-old? Right? And how does a 2-year-old act? Right? Mine. No, mine. Right? Do you have to teach a 2-year-old to act that way? No, you don't teach a 2-year-old to act that way. It's just innate in them. They're childish, they're selfish, and they don't want to do what you say, right? They're 2-year-olds, right? So it's just innate. So our innate system is, or our innate defenses are just built in, okay? They are not adaptive, right? To adapt means to change, yes? To change, okay? So they don't change, they're the same, right? And I'm going to go over these briefly and then we'll talk about each one of these individually, okay? Number one, the surface barriers, okay? The surface barriers, okay? Now, I was taught the concept, the acid mantle. What does that mean, right? Mantle, not the thing over your fireplace, right? Mantle meaning, it's an old word years ago. It meant like cloak or covering, right? Yes? Elisha says to Elijah, let thy mantle fall on me, right? Right? Because Elijah was going up, Elisha was taking over, he's going to be the number one prophet, right? And so it was an expression. But anyway, the acid mantle, what does that mean? It means this. Our skin, if you take the pH, the surface, is a little bit acidic, right? Oh, by the way, if by some miracle you eat that taco and it's not exactly sterile, guess what? Your stomach's full of acid and it kills germs, right? Yes? Right? Ladies, the vagina is acidic. It kills germs, okay? When you have trouble is when you don't have that acid there. That's when you can get infections. But anyway, right? But that acid is like a covering, okay? The acid mantle is the concept I was taught, okay? Number two, mucosa, right? The lining of our GI tract, mucosa, right? It protects us. When we eat food and this and that, is it really part of us? Well, it can be incorporated in us, but part of it just comes out the other end, right? So is it really ever, it's inside us for a period of time, but anyway, right? So the mucosa, and we'll talk about certain things about the mucosa that help our immune system, okay? Now, the internal defenses, phagocytes, right? Phagocytes, right? Immune cells that go up there eat germs, right? That's what phagocytosis is. Eating of germs or debris or waste products, right? Natural killer cells. Don't you love that? Natural killer cells, right? Yeah. Special lymphocytes. We're going to talk about them. Okay? Inflammation. Anytime we have an injury, it becomes inflamed. Okay? Inflammation. And that inflammation helps with the healing process, okay? Antimicrobial proteins, okay? In our tears, in our saliva, right? There is some antimicrobial proteins that called lysozymes that kill germs, right? Every time we touch our eye or rub our eye, we'd have eye infections all the time if we didn't have that. Yes? And such. And our skin secretes some antimicrobial proteins called defensins, Defensins, defensins. And oh, by the way, 2 days ago, maybe it was this morning, I can't remember, cut my neck shaving, right? And within about 15 minutes, we talked about how the neutrophils are there, right? And very quickly, too, the defensins on the surface of that skin are going way up because there was an injury there, okay? Defensins, okay? They're a broad spectrum antibiotic, okay? Now, broad spectrum meaning this. You got a sick kid, you take him to the doctor, he's probably going to give him amoxicillin, the most common one, right? And amoxicillin is a broad spectrum. It kills a bunch of different varieties, a bunch of different germs, right? Now, if that doesn't do it, then he's going to change to something different, right? But a broad spectrum meaning kills a whole bunch of different germs, okay? Now, that wouldn't work if you had TB, you'd have to be more specific, okay? But anyway, a broad spectrum, and these defensins are a broad spectrum antibiotic, okay? And fever, right? What does fever do? Fever increases our basal metabolic rate, and fever makes every chemical reaction that's going on happen faster, right? If you're in chemistry class and you're trying to make it go faster, right? The reaction, yes, turn the heat up, right? And you get those molecules slamming around faster and faster and faster and faster, and the reaction happens faster. That's one way to speed up a reaction, right? Yes? And so it's the same way. Now, traditionally, the medical folks have viewed fever as, oh, it's bad, get the fever down. And when fever gets extreme and very high, it can be dangerous, especially little children, they can go into convulsions. But I was taught 40 years ago by a pediatrician that fever is a normal, natural thing. And unless the fever spikes very quickly or unless the fever is very, very high, he did not intervene. Okay? Now, with the COVID, I watched MedCram, a lot of videos. Roger Seaholt, MD, he's a genius. And he talked about that very concept that fever is not bad, that fever ramps up our immune system. It stimulates those immune cells to kill germs. And so unless it gets very high, maybe it's better not to interfere with that. And I thought, that's what I was taught 40 years ago. But anyway, so I thought that was interesting. But fever, right? Right? Pyrogens, Pyrogens, right? The mast cells and I'll think of the name in just a moment. The other cells release pyrogens, right? And pyrogens make the hypothalamus reset the thermostat, right? Remember, thalamus, right, is a gateway to the cerebral cortex, but the hypothalamus controls the autonomic nervous system, the automatic stuff, right? What our temperature is and such, okay? And so these pyrogens cause the hypothalamus to set the temperature, right? If you're cold in the winter and you turn the thermostat up, make it hotter, turn it up, it's going to get hotter in the house, right? And that's that, okay? Now, the first line of defense, and this is the second line of defense. Okay? Now, the way I like to explain that is this, right? Okay. My ancestry is British, English, Welsh. Okay, and in the late 1800s, Britannia ruled the waves. They were the superpower of the world. They were the most powerful. The British Army, the most powerful. Okay, and anytime the British Army was attacked, they formed the square. And what happened was, all the guys would line their muskets out, right? Yes? And back then, it was before semi-automatics, right? So you would fire one shot, and then you'd have to reload before you could fire another shot. It took about 20, 25, 30 seconds, right? So the British, anytime they were attacked, they formed the square, okay? And the British Army was disciplined. And the sergeants would yell first rank, and the first rank would fire. And then they would get down on their knee and reload their gun. And then he would yell second rank, kaboom. Then he would yell third rank, kaboom. Then he would yell first rank. It was a wall of bullets like a machine gun, over and over again. This was the first line of defense, the second and the third. And if someone was killed, they just made the square smaller. In all of history, the British square was only broken one time by the Zulus. Only one time, because there were 4,000 Zulus and about 1,200 British. Okay? And the Zulus had the little spears, right? One of my favorite movies, Zulu. You'll see this. Michael Caine's first movie. You know who Michael Caine is? His very first movie, Michael Caine, right? Yes? They'll never make a movie like that again because they literally had thousands of real live Zulus there. Now it's all computer generated crap. But anyway, this was the first line, this was the second line, this was the third line of defense. Okay? This is our first line of defense, the surface barriers, right? That's why if you get a cut, you cover it up with a Band-Aid. You don't want germs getting in there, right? Then it goes to the internal defenses. Okay? And finally, the third line of defense is the adaptive. Adaptive means to change, right? Right? To change. Adaptation. Yes? Do things change? Absolutely. I am taller than my father. Both of my boys are taller than me. Right? Yes? And so things change. Right? Right? Now, in my opinion, they don't change species, but there are minor changes and variations. But anyway, right? Because we got Chihuahuas, and we got Golden Retrievers, and we got Great Danes, right? But anyway, the adaptive defenses. The adaptive defenses is when the body changes in order to kill germs, right? And that's going to be your humoral and your cellular immunity. And your humoral immunity is the B cells, and the B cells, we already talked about, crank out antibodies, right? The B cells, right? The plasma cells crank out antibodies, right? Antibodies are specific, yes? Antibodies are specific. They're made for one germ. And then cellular immunity. Cellular immunity is when cells of the body, the T cells, go kill germs. Or they kill infected cells, or they kill cancer cells, okay? So here you got cells of the body protecting the body. Here, with humoral, you got antibodies, okay? Antibodies work in several different ways, right? Maybe here's a germ and antibodies will attach all around. Okay. Yes, and they will block binding sites so it can't bind and attach to our tissue. Maybe they will hook germs together, and then they will clump. Oh, by the way, we've seen that, haven't we? clumping, right? Right? And our book uses the term precipitation. Precipitation, right? The clouds, they get full of water and eventually the water falls down. It precipitates out. In the same way here. Okay? Now, antibodies, newsflash, do not kill disease. Antibodies mark things to be killed. Antibodies mark things so that the body, its innate system, will be marked and it will kill that. Okay? Get rid of that. Lyse it, split it, clump it, whatever. Okay? But the antibodies specifically do not kill germs. Okay? But anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, this is the overview, though. Okay? This is the overview. First, we have good skin surfaces and mucosa that's not broken. Then we have all these cells that are not specific, but they go after germs. They don't go after individual germs specifically. And then finally, we get to the adaptive defenses, and that's the humoral and the cellular. Okay? An adaptive meaning, here's a germ, and I'm going to make an antibody exactly for that germ. Okay? My body is going to make an antibody exactly for that germ. Okay? And such. Right? So now, let's talk about each one of these individually. Okay? Yes? And you must have watched that movie Zulu. It's outstanding if you like history, right? It's a war movie, yes. And I must tell you too, my friend John Gilly grew up in South Africa, and he watched that movie Zulu when he was a kid. He's my age. And he watched it with a bunch of nurses that were all, Zulu ladies, right? And every time in the movie when the Zulus would kill a white man, the black nurses would yell, "Amanza!" which is like, yeah, get him, So, pretty wild. But anyway, real funny the way he told that story. But anyway, surface barriers, right? Again, skin mucosa, the acid mantle. I already mentioned that. The skin, right? The skin, the vagina, that acid, the stomach with the acid, it impairs and kills germs, right? Right? Okay. Then we talked about enzymes, salivary enzymes, lysozyme, and such. In the lacrimal fluid are tears, and in the respiratory mucus and such. And then, of course, too, mucin. Mucin is that thick, slimy stuff, mucus, right? And it like encapsulates. It's very sticky if you haven't noticed, right? And it encapsulates germs and such, and gives time for our body to kill them, right? Traps microbes in the mouth, and it pushes them to the back of the nose, to the nasopharynx there. So we can swallow that junk. It goes through the stomach and gets killed, okay? The surface of the lungs should be sterile. I'm going to say that again. The surface of the lungs should be sterile unless we have an infection, like a chest infection, yes? And so the purpose of sending those germs through the GI tract is to kill them, right? And such. And to keep them, germs, from going into the lungs because we don't want an upper respiratory infection or lower respiratory infection, right? Okay. Defensins, okay? Membranes and skin secrete a small amount of a broad spectrum antibiotic that increases dramatically when the barrier is broken, okay? There's another one that our eccrine sweat glands secrete called dermacidin. D-E-R-M-I-C-I-D-I-N, dermacidin. What does derm mean?
Skin.
Say that again?
Skin.
Skin, exactly. Skin. What does sidin mean? Or what does side mean? What other word do you know that has side in it?
So does it mean acid?
Go ahead. Go ahead, say it.
Suicide?
Suicide, homicide, bactericidal. What does side mean? To kill, right? 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 To kill yourself, to kill someone else. Yes? So, side means death. Okay? Okay. Now, the nasal hairs are coated with mucus. Okay? And they act as a filter. And they trap germs coming in and out. Okay? Yes? You live in Delhart, Texas. It's very dusty. You work outside on a windy day, right? You come in the house, you blow your nose, you'll see what I'm talking about, right? Okay. The second line of defense is the internal defenses, or the innate defenses, right? Yes? Okay? You cut yourself shaving, you brush your teeth a little too hard and you scrape your gum, right? Within about 15 minutes, remember the neutrophils. The neutrophils are the first ones on the side, on the scene within 10 or 15 minutes, right? Yes, the neutrophils, those are the Marines, right? They're the most abundant white blood cell. Oh, by the way, if something gets infected and you get pus in there, that is dead germs, that is dead tissue, and a bunch of dead neutrophils. Okay? That's what it's composed of. Okay? Macrophages, too. We talked about macrophages, right? Remember, they're lymphatic cells, and they're in the bloodstream, they're lymph. And then when they go into the tissue, we call them macrophages. And macro means big, and phage means to eat. Big eaters. Okay? Okay. Now, one other thing I mentioned about the macrophages is that some of them float around in the bloodstream looking for stuff to eat, immune surveillance, but many of them are fixed. Fixed meaning they're either in the liver or in the spleen or in lymph nodes, and they're sitting there, come on, bring the germs, I'm going to eat them, bring them on, right? They're sitting there waiting for the germs to be brought to them. Okay? They're fixed. Okay? The liver or the spleen. Okay? Okay. Now, right? Here's a germ. And we talked about in the very first chapter the glycocalyx, also called the carbohydrate signature, right? That every cell is coated with certain specific cell surface proteins, right? And that is how our immune system will feel that cell and go, yes, that's part of Dr. Weld, or no, what is this? This is not us, right? And we'll attack it if it's not part of us, right? So, individual, we're specific, okay? Well, what happens is that germs, our body will recognize that. So many germs are evil, by the way, right? Many germs will secrete a capsule, right? And because it has a slimy capsule around it, it's hard for the phagocytes to catch a hold onto it and get a hold of it, right? If you grease a pig, yes, okay? And so what happens is our body has a process called opsonization. And basically, we stick handles, right? So that way the phagocytes can grab a hold and eat this germ. And that process is called opsonization, okay? Many bacteria have an external capsule to avoid phagocytosis, and this opsonization comes from complement proteins. And we're going to talk about the complement system in just a little bit. Certain proteins floating around in the blood that can become activated and do certain things. And one of the things they do is, too, they'll poke a hole in here, And when they poke a hole in here, water can run in here quickly and lyse the cell. Okay? Opsonization, or coating of a pathogen with protein so that the phagocytes can eat it. Okay? Now, natural killer cells. Let's talk about natural killer cells. Okay? NK, right? They're big lymphocytes. Okay? But they are not phagocytes. They do not go up and eat germs, okay? When they contact a germ, they will induce a process called apoptosis, A-P-O-P-T-O-S-I-S. Okay? Let me explain what that concept is, right? Okay. Okay, apoptosis, cell suicide, and it actually means a falling away, okay? But that doesn't really explain what it does, right? What it does is this, right? We have a lifespan, animals have a lifespan, right? I've had several golden retrievers, they last about 15 years, okay? Big dogs have a shorter lifespan. Those little bitty yappy dogs, you know, so annoying, yeah, those can last like 20-something years sometimes, okay? So most animals have a lifespan. Our cells have a lifespan. The cells that I am made up are not the cells I had when I was 10 years old, right? Okay? So cells have a lifespan, right? Just like us, we're born, we're babies, we grow up, become middle-aged, we get older, old age like me, and then we die. That's the way it goes, right? So cells are programmed to go through that life cycle. But the natural killer cells stimulate what's called apoptosis. Apoptosis means it stimulates that cell to go through its lifespan very quickly and die. Okay? Right? Think of a science fiction movie where they go around with a gun and they go, and they shoot you, and all of a sudden, what are you, 18, 19, 20, okay? And all of a sudden, within 5 minutes, you're 70 years old, right? And when you're 70 years old, you're much closer to death than at 20, yes? So apoptosis speeds up that cycle so that the cells die on their own or commit suicide on their own, okay? It is called a falling away or cell suicide. The cell kills itself, but instead of the cell lasting for, you know, we talked about red blood cells, 90 to 120 days, right? But if apoptosis occurred, they might last for 10 days. See, we speed through that cycle quickly. So that's what apoptosis is, okay? So these natural killer cells can induce that, yes? And these natural killer cells increase the inflammatory chemicals and increase the inflammation, yes? Okay. All right, what are the signs of inflammation? Inflammation, rubor, calor, tumor, dolor, and our book gives one that's actually very good, altered function, right? Rubor, what does rubor mean? Redness, right? What is calor, right? Talking to a guy in the convenience store yesterday. Oh, working outside, mucho calor, right? Very hot, right? Heat, right? Tumor. We think of the word tumor and oh, he has a tumor. Yes, but actually tumor means swelling. That's what tumor means. Okay? Yeah, these are back to the Latin, right? Hence the Spanish, which is a derivative, right? And dolor, right? Yes? Okay. Madison here is going to be a PA. I can, okay. Doloraki, right? Do you hurt here? Do you hurt here? Or when they use the term duele, that means I hurt. I hurt. That's another term for pain, right? But I will push on them, doloraki, and then I'll ask them, poquito, mucho, right? And such. But anyway, yes? Okay, so redness, heat because vasodilation, right? Histamine, blood vessels swell up, get big, more blood flows to the ear, it gets red, it swells up, and you get pain, and our book adds altered function, and that's really two. When you get inflamed, whether it's your wrist or my left knee coming down that mountain last weekend, right? It's altered function, okay? Okay. Okay, real quickly, not in your book, I'm going to mention this. Autophagy, A-U-T-O-P-H-A-G-Y, autophagy, okay? Autophagy means self-eating, right? And what does that mean? That means this. Our cells are constantly being turned over. The cells that I have made up now are not the ones I had 50 years ago when I was a kid, right? And so what happens is a cell has a lifespan, and then a cell kind of goes into old age. You know, our old people, they go to the nursing home and they don't really do anything, right? We use the word senescent, all right? Or senescence, meaning he's old, he's in the nursing home, he can't do anything, he's senile, right? Yes? So what happens is that in our body we will have many senescent cells, older cells that aren't really functioning properly anymore. And what happens is that our body will take those old senescent cells that are not functioning properly, they're just sitting there, and it will break them down. It will break them down into protein and recycle new fresh cells. Okay? And that's a very good thing because senescent cells are associated with cancer. Okay, which is not good. So we want to get rid of those senescent cells, right? In fact, they're working on drugs now called senolescents to try and kill those senescent cells. But anyway, okay? Now, the process where those cells are killed is called auto, meaning self, phagy, autophagy, eating, okay? Guy just won a Nobel Prize. A Japanese guy's been studying this for the last, 40 years. And such. I tried to listen to his lecture. His English, his accent was so bad I couldn't take it. But anyway, how do we induce autophagy, which is a very good thing, by the way? What would you think we could do to cause that to increase and get rid of those senescent cells that we're not really using? The most common way is this. Number one, exercise. If you exercise regularly, right? Yes, you're going to get rid of those cells. We're going to break down those cells for the protein and we're going to recycle it so we'll be buff, right? Yes, exercise. The number two way, which is very popular now, is fasting. If you don't eat, right? We have certain, Dr. Fung used the term nutrient sensors, okay? And so if you fast for a long enough period of time, your body will start to eat itself. But it's not going to eat the good cells first, it's going to eat the bad cells, the old cells, the cells that are no good anymore, right? The senescent cells first, right? And so it's thought that that is a way to prevent disease is by getting rid of some of these senescent cells. And again, the drug companies are working on senolytics, right? This is a big part of that they're studying now for anti-aging, right? But anyway, autophagy is normal. It's us eating ourselves. Apoptosis is, boom, speeding up that life cycle to kill that cell, right? Okay. inflammatory chemicals. Inflammatory chemicals are released into the extracellular fluid by injured or stressed tissue, right? Most of the time that's going to involve histamine. You're going to get blood to flow to that area, right? And such. Again, certain cells called mast cells will secrete that histamine, and it signals to the body that, hey, we got a problem here, we need to heal this area, right? We also, in the lining of our mucosa, have some cells called toll-like receptors, right? And these are on macrophages that are fixed that line our GI tract. And when they are turned on, and there are supposedly 11 different variations of that. So most things that we're infected with, one of those toll-like receptors is going to have a receptor for it and attach it, and begin the process of ramping up the immune system to eliminate it. All right? Each class of toll-like receptors recognizes a particular microbe, and it triggers the release of inflammatory chemicals. Okay? Let's talk about inflammatory chemicals, right? Inflammation, right? Number one, prostaglandins, 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 okay? Prostaglandins are inflammatory chemicals, and guess what aspirin does? Breaks down prostaglandins, right? That's what most of the anti-inflammatories do, okay? Oh, by the way, ladies, if you have menstrual cramps, prostaglandins, right? So Midol and things like that are supposed to help with that. I don't know, I'm not a lady. Okay? Now, there's another one called cytokines, cytokines. These are major inflammatory chemicals. And notice too, with the COVID-19, they talked about the cytokine storm, where people get a massive release of these cytokines, and they get inflammation throughout their whole body, but especially their lungs. And that's when they're headed to the ICU, and that's when it's touch and go, right? The cytokines, okay? There's another one called kinins, K-I-N-I-N-S. Again, this is a group, this is a group, this is a group. I'm not talking about individuals. These are prostaglandins, a group of chemicals. Prostaglandins are fat-based, lipid-based, right? And such. Okay. Inflammatory chemicals cause hyperemia, right? More blood to flow to that area. Another way of saying that is vasodilation. More blood flows to the area. That's why it gets hot and red, okay? They increase the capillary permeability, yes? Remember we talked about capillaries have tiny little holes in them, right? Remember some of the capillaries are called even fenestrated, yes? And that is so white blood cells can go through them and get to where the inflammation is, right? Okay? Do you remember I drew the picture? Here's a nail sticking in somebody's foot, right? Yes. And here's a blood vessel running by, yes. Right? And we use the term margination, right? Margination, right? Where those blood cells attach to the margins of the blood vessel. And then when the white blood cell goes inside the cell, we call that diapedesis, P-E-D-E-S-I-S. Dia meaning through, it goes through the blood vessel and into the extracellular fluid, diapedesis. I think like pedals on your bicycle, your feet go on the pedals, okay? And we talked about inflammatory chemicals that are released at the site of the injury, and they cause positive chemotherapy, chemotaxis, right? Positive chemotaxis, and that just means it draws inflammatory, it draws the white blood cells go there because they're, right? And I use the example too. My grandmother, she made 3 loaves of bread at a time, and when they came out of the oven, they lived in the country, they opened the windows and they set the bread on the windowsills, and we're outside, could smell that bread, and instantly we went in the house because we wanted some of that bread, right? Yes. Positive chemotaxis, I could smell it, and I'm going in there and getting my share before my brother Glenn got there, but anyway. Yeah, he's this much taller than me and twice as big. Okay? Right? Okay. Alrighty. Let's talk about the causes of pain. Okay? The causes of pain. Okay? Make sure you know these words: positive chemotaxis, diapedesis, margination. Right? There's a lovely picture in your book, a graphic, I should say, and make sure you get that. Yes? Causes of pain. Number 1, swelling or pressure on nerves, right? And we call those nociceptors, Nociceptors, right? Nociceptive means painful, right? Nociceptive means painful, nociceptors, right? So if you get swelling or pressure on a nerve, then that will cause problems, pain. Number 2, bacterial toxins. Many nasty germs secrete toxins that make us hurt. Have you ever got the flu and your whole body aches, and your ankles hurt, and your knees hurt, and your back hurts, just all over? You just feel like death warmed over, right? Well, you can take bacterial toxins for that, okay? Noxious chemicals, okay? And number 3 is the release of prostaglandins, Prostoglandins, and kinins, and I didn't write it down, but I'm sure cytokines are there too. Okay? And again, we said aspirin more technically inhibits prostaglandin synthesis. Okay? And that results in analgesia, right? Analgesia. Analgesia means pain relief, right? Certain drugs are considered analgesics, right? That make you feel better. I got a headache, I take some ibuprofen. I got a headache, I take some aspirin, or such, okay? Okay. Leukocytosis. Leukocytosis. Leukocytosis, right? Normally we're going to have about 11K white blood cells, but when we get an infection, sometimes that'll go up to 55K, right? Yes? Okay? And remember too, is that a diagnosis? Oh, he has leukocytosis. No, it's not a diagnosis, that's a symptom, right? It shows you something's going on. You probably have an infection, right? But It's not really a specific diagnosis. It just says, hey, he's sick. His white blood cells have gone way up, right? From 11,000 to 55,000, right? Okay. Now, I just erased my picture. Darn it. Remember we said the blood vessels with the nail here sticking in, and we said the margination, right? Margination. Well, these little projections are called cellular adhesion molecules, or CAM. Okay, cellular adhesion molecule, CAMs. Right? What does adhesion mean? Stick to, exactly. Yes? Right? Right? You ever had a roll of adhesive tape? Yes? Right? Cellular adhesive molecules. These little molecules here that sprout on the inside of the blood vessel and catch the, cause the margination. Oh, by the way, I did not know this. I was watching one of Dr. Seaholt's videos. Certain drugs make all these let go and go floating through the bloodstream. Certain drugs do that. So you give them this drug and their white blood cell count spikes. Oh, okay, yeah, well, I gave them this drug. But anyway, interesting. I did not know that. Okay? And we already talked about diapedesis, where the white blood cells go through, and chemotaxis, right? Okay. Now, let's talk just for a minute about tuberculosis, okay? Tuberculosis. It's not real common in the country, but it's getting more and more because of immigrants, illegal immigrants and such, okay, in our country. And what happens is that mycobacteria, you don't have to know this, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, I believe is what it is. Okay, tuberculosis. Anyway, what happens is this: if we catch tuberculosis, our body has a hard time getting rid of it, right? But what can happen is in our lungs, if you look at our lungs, right, you will see certain areas where these germs are, where macrophages have surrounded them, right? And 6 months, a year later, guess what? You have an infectious, infectious granuloma, granuloma, an infectious granuloma, okay? And what that is it's where the body has walled off in the lungs. I'm talking about TB now. They can be anywhere, but in the lungs, where these macrophages are constantly working on killing those germs, okay? But they may be there for years. Tuberculosis, now we can treat it with certain antibiotics, but before we couldn't. And you went to a sanitarium. And you went to the sanitarium, you got rest and good food and a lot of sunlight, and generally you got better, right? That's because your body would form these infectious granulomas, right? But if you went home and a year or 2 or 5 years later, you get tired, you got run down, your immune system was down, guess what? Germs can break out of these and you get active TB again, okay? That was years ago. Now we have antibiotics, and TB is very hard to kill, and we have antibiotics, and you have to take them for like 6 months to totally get rid of it. Yes? Now, I know a lot of you folks are thinking, well, you know, that's not around here, blah, 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 this and that. No, one of my patients was a nurse at the hospital who caught TB from one of the patients in the hospital right here in Delaware, Texas. Okay? So it is around. Yes? Think about this too. If you go to homeless shelters, the people don't have the best health habits, do they? And many of them are mentally ill. That's why they're homeless, because they're mentally ill. Just factually, okay? And If they're sick and you take them to the doctor and the doctor says you have TB, you need to take this prescription for the next 6 months. Are they going to be very good about doing it? No, they're not going to be good about doing that because they're in a homeless shelter. There's probably a reason they're in a homeless shelter. And oh, by the way, they're not going to march down to Walmart and buy their antibiotics next month either, are they? Because they probably have no money. Yes? So, anyway, interesting. Okay? But infectious granuloma is what I was trying to get across. Some pathogens are not killed by the drugs or phagocytosis, and they remain in those macrophages. And that is why when I started working in the hospital, you had to get a chest x-ray. They x-rayed your chest to make sure you didn't have this, right? And nowadays, generally, they do the TB test by sticking a needle up under there. And if you have TB or have been exposed to it, you'll get a big red spot there. And if you get the big red, you have to go back like 10 days later and show the nurse. And the nurse, if she sees a big red spot, guess what? Then you got to go get the chest x-ray to make sure that you don't have it. Now they don't do routine chest x-rays because it's more expensive. And you get a little radiation, right? But that's what's going to happen if you, anyway. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about an antimicrobial protein, okay? Let's talk about interferon, I-N-T-E-R-F-E-R-O-N, right? Interferon treatment was coming out in about 1980, and they thought it was going to revolutionize cancer therapy. And it does help people, but it doesn't cure cancer. But let me explain how interferon works, okay? Here's a group of cells, right? Okay, there's a graphic on this, and it is figure 20.5 in my book, right? Now, here we go. Here's a virus, and it infects a cell. And when this virus infects a cell, the cell's probably going to die. But when the cell becomes infected, it starts making interferon. Interferon exits the cell, comes to the cells around it, okay? It stimulates the cells around it to make defenses against the virus, okay? So basically this cell, he's going to get killed because he's infected by a virus, but the interferon protects the cells that are around it, right? Yes? It's like the old war movie, right? The 3 guys in the foxhole, and one guy's got shot through the gut and he's going to die. And he gathers up the guns and he tells the other guys, you make a run for it, I'll hold him off, because he's going to die anyway. So he's blasting away so his friends can run away, and his friends saves their life, but he knows he's going to die anyway. So, right? He's trying to protect his friends. Well, it's the same situation. This cell's going to die anyway, basically. It's infected by a virus, but it secretes that interferon to protect these cells that will tell these cells to secrete the protein to prevent getting killed by the virus or infected by the virus. Okay? Right? So interferon does not protect the cell that produces it. It's the cells around it, if that makes sense. Okay? Okay. Now, real quickly, let's talk about the complement system. C-O-M-P-L-E-M-E-N-T, okay? It's about 20 different proteins floating around in your blood, and they are in the inactive state. And what happens is that when they become activated, they stimulate the immune system to ramp up the inflammatory response. Okay? Now, some of the complement proteins are responsible for, there's 20 of them, and I think it's like number C3 or something like that, right? It'll cut a hole in the germ so water can flow in and it will be lysed. Some of them will stimulate T cells and the B cells to get after it, get going, right? Make some antibodies, right? When they're activated, the complement system, it increases inflammatory chemicals and it amplifies all aspects of the inflammatory process. And certain ones will lyse and kill certain bacteria, and it enhances the innate and the adaptive mechanism. Okay? Right? And one of the complements is responsible for some opsonization, which we talked about, where that's attaching things to the outside of the cell. So, yes. Okay. I already talked about fever, right? White blood cells and macrophages, they release pyrogens, right? What is the guy who loves to start fires? A what?
Pyromaniac.
Pyromaniac, right? So pyrogens raise the temperature, yes? And they work on the hypothalamus, not the thalamus, but the hypothalamus, right? Yes? Okay. Now, let's talk about where the body does specific things and changes and produces antibodies, the adaptive defenses, okay? The adaptive defenses, okay? Note, the innate defenses are always there and they're ready to rock and roll, and that's their first line of defense, right? But the adaptive defenses take time because your body has to make antibodies for that specific germ, okay? So let's talk about that, okay? The adaptive defenses. Okay, that's our third line of defense, right? Yes? It protects us from microbes and abnormal body cells. And when this adaptive defense system breaks down and doesn't work, then we get terrible diseases, autoimmune diseases, and things like AIDS, okay? Where our immune system goes down and doesn't work properly, okay? Now, adaptive defenses. Number one, they're specific, specific, okay? They make antibodies for that particular germ. They are specific, okay? And they target particular pathogens. Number two, they are systemic, systemic. What does systemic mean, right? These antibodies are going to go floating around through your whole body, from your big toe to your head and back to the heart, right? Systemic, they go through your whole body, okay? And number three is memory, 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 right? Memory. Now, we talked about that, I believe, yesterday, yes? Okay. I went to elementary school. I caught a lot of germs. I had a lot of colds, sore throats, this and that. As an adult, do I get sick very often? No, because I was exposed to tons of stuff when I was young. If I'm exposed to, say, a rhinovirus that causes a runny nose, guess what? If I was exposed to that in elementary school, my immune system has memory cells that remember, oh yeah, we've seen this germ before, we know what to do, right? And they'll start cranking out the antibodies and I won't get sick, okay? That's what it means by memory cells, okay? If they've been exposed to it, yes? The COVID-19, if you had the first strain of COVID-19, when the second strain around, yes, certain people get infected and such. Some people get infected, have been infected 3 times, right? Yes? But there is some immunity. There is some immunity, especially if you've been sick and your body produce antibodies against it, right? Because when they gave the shot, they said, you're not going to catch it and you're not going to spread it and pass it along. Yes? Oh, by the way, was that true? No, it wasn't true. No, right? Our president just got over it, right? 4 times, twice immunized, twice boosted, 4 times, still caught it, right? So, but anyway, But if you've had it before, this latest strain, there's about a 92% chance you're not going to get it if you've had the previous one, because the vaccination is just against the spike protein as opposed to the whole thing. But anyway, memory, it remembers, okay? And yes, in time, the titers, the amount that's in our blood goes down, and that happens with natural immunity, but it also happens with the vaccination. You get the vaccination, and for about 2 months, you're real good, and then it starts waning very quickly. Okay? But anyway, okay, let's talk about humoral. The adaptive defenses are divided into humoral and cellular, cellular, humoral and cellular, okay? Humoral, aka antibody mediated immunity, okay? Right? So, in the body fluids, the blood or the lymphatic fluid, right? Remember we talked about the B cells, right? Convert to plasma cells, and the plasma cells put out antibodies, right? And these plasma cells, right, through mitosis, will go like this, yes, and oh, by the way, 3 of these will crank out antibodies, and 1 of them will be the memory cell for next time, okay? Okay. Antibodies produced by the lymphocytes circulate in the blood in the lymph, where they bind to bacteria, bacterial toxins, and free viruses. Antibodies inactivate bacterial toxins and mark them for destruction by phagocytosis or complement, or the complement system. Okay? Let me explain that, a little bit about that too. I like to tell this story. My boys were paintballers, right? When they were little. They loved the paintball. And one time I had the tank to fill up their little tanks, right? In the garage, yes? And so, where did paintball came from? Paintball came from, years ago they came up with the guns, and the paintball guns were used by foresters. And the foresters would go through the national forest with the paintball gun, and trees that were diseased, or trees that they wanted cut and thinned out, right? They would take the paintball gun and pow, pow, pow certain trees, okay? And then after the foresters went through, guess what? Here comes the lumberjacks with the chainsaws, and they would cut down the trees that the foresters marked, okay? So the paintball gun, and foresters are young, stout guys. It's very hard work, right? And so, you know, what they start doing, shooting each other with the paintball guns. But anyway, paintball was born. But that wasn't their original purpose. The original purpose was they went through and they boom, 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 marked the trees. Okay? The ones that were to be cut down. Yes? Because years ago, we didn't let the forest just grow, 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 grow. We managed the forest. All these forest fires we're having now is because there's so much brush down there. And they didn't clean the forest out any. And so because of that, there's so much tinder down there. And finally, California's like, well, maybe we need to do some thinning of our forests. But anyway, sorry. My point being is, the paintball gun marked the tree. This tree's to be cut down. In the same way, the antibody marks the germ. This is to be killed. This is to be got rid of, okay? The antibody does not do the killing. The antibody stimulates the innate system to kill this particular thing, okay? So the antibody does not. Now, certain antibodies, I talked about how will inactivate, right? They will attach all the way around and cover up binding sites so it can't get you sick. And if it's a certain toxin that makes you hurt, it will stop that because it's covered up, okay? My point being is that, anyway, antibodies technically do not kill germs. They mark germs to be killed, okay? Okay. Now, let's talk about cellular immunity, right? Cellular immunity. Cellular immunity is the T cells, right? Okay. When lymphocytes themselves, rather than antibodies, defend the body. Living cells defend the body, right? Lymphocytes act against such targets by directly killing infected cells, by indirectly by releasing chemicals that enhance the inflammatory response, and they activate other lymphocytes, okay? The T cells activate the B cells and say, hey, come on, B cells, make some antibodies. Come on, get after it. Let's go, right? They stimulate the B cells to make the antibodies, okay? So, here we go. Table 20.3. Table 20.3. Table 20.3. You need to write that down because that is an overview of the B lymphocytes and the T lymphocytes, okay? This is major. You have to know this chart for the midterm. This is major, okay? Let's talk about it. The B lymphocytes in the left-hand column, right? The B lymphocytes are for humoral immunity, yes? The B lymphocytes, do they secrete antibodies? Yes. What is their target? Extracellular pathogens. Extracellular on the outside of the cell, right? Bacteria, fungus, parasites, okay? And some fluid that are outside the cells. Where do these B cells, these humoral cells, where do they come from? They come from the red bone marrow, okay? And where do they mature? They mature in the red bone marrow, the B cells, okay? The effector cells are the plasma cells. And do they have memory? Yes, they have memory. They remember, oh, I've seen that germ before. Crank out some protein, crank out some antibodies. Okay? Again, that is humoral. Again, table 20.3 in your book. Now the T lymphocytes. The T lymphocytes are for cellular. Okay? T lymphocytes, do they secrete antibodies? No. What do they work on? Intracellular. Intra. A cell that's already been infected, maybe a virus-infected cell or a cancer cell. Where do the T lymphocytes come from? The red bone marrow. But note the site of maturation. Where do they mature? They go to the thymus. Remember the thymus right up under the breastbone? And when you get to be a big teenager, 18, 19, 20 years old, it starts shriveling up. All the T cells have been activated, yes? And there are several different types of T cells that they talk about. And do the T cells have memory? Yes, the T cells have memory. They remember, I've seen this germ before, okay? My point being is, you got to know that chart. The difference between humoral and cellular immunity, you got to know the difference between B cells and T cells. One's going to take care of bacteria and fungus with antibodies, and the other's going to go after virus-infected cells, cells that are already infected, or tumor cells, right? And such. Okay, now, I need to draw a little graph here, or a little picture here. It's a figure 20.12. Figure 20.12. Okay? Okay, humoral responses, right? Humoral responses, and when I say humoral, you know, okay, that means B cells and we're making antibodies, right? Okay. Let's talk about this. Okay? If I come in contact with a germ, here's day 0. I become infected. I rode on an airplane. Okay? And what happens is that my humoral immunity kicks in. Okay? It usually starts on day 6 or day 7, cranking out antibodies. And then what happens is that from day 7, 8, 9, 10, that's when I'm pretty much going to have the highest number. And that's when my antibodies are taking care of the germ. And I start feeling better. Okay? Say it's a cold. I caught a cold. Usually it takes 7 days to make the antibodies. By day 10, I feel way better. My blood is full of antibodies. And then it starts going down, right? The doctor says, take this in 7 to 10 days, you'll feel better. Or don't take it in 7 to 10 days and you'll feel better if it's a virus, right? So, no, the antibodies, it takes about 7 days for a body to start cranking them out, 6 to 7 days. And then the level goes, the titer, the level or concentration, whatever, goes higher, higher, higher. And then as you get well, it drops off. Right? And that's the first immune response, making antibodies. Okay? However, think about this. On day 28, guess what? On day 28, I get exposed to the same germ. But remember this. Humoral immunity, B cells, some of those cells that they crank out, have memory. So when I am exposed to that same germ, my body goes, oh, we know this. We know what to do. And they start immediately cranking out tons of antibodies on the very first day. And then they come down and I don't get sick. How come I don't get sick? I don't get sick because my body has already been primed, right? That's the way vaccination works, yes? Vaccination gives you this first response, so that way when you come in contact with that germ again, your immune system is already primed and very quickly it will start cranking out those antibodies, okay? So this is the first immune response, and this is the second, okay? Now, oh, by the way, on day 35, worthless. On day 35, guess what? I get exposed to another germ, okay? Maybe green will work. On day 35, I get exposed to another germ. What is that going to look like? It's going to look like that, right? Because guess what? This is my first immune response, so this is going to look just like this. Oh, by the way, on day 53, if I get exposed to that germ again, what's going to happen? Right? How come? Because the memory cells kicked in, because they remember, oh, we've seen this germ before, right? Yes? And so, important that you get this. This is humoral immunity. It takes 6 or 7 days for your body to crank out the antibodies. The level gets higher, higher, higher. You start to get better. And as you get well by about day number 10, then, boom, 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 the titer will get very low. But B cells and the T cells also have memory. They remember, if I get exposed again, boom. Oh, by the way, if it's a new germ, I have to do this whole process over again, right? If it's a different germ. My body has to crank out antibodies. It takes 7 to 10 days, and then I usually feel better, okay? And if 10 or 15 or 3 weeks later, I get the same germ, guess what? My body's already primed. It knows what to do. It knows how to crank out those antibodies. Okay? Okay. And again, this is the basis of vaccination, right? They give you measles, mumps, rubella, MMR, so that way and they give you your first exposure, and if you're exposed to it again, guess what? You're probably not going to get sick because your body is already primed to get rid of it, okay? That's the whole basis of the vaccination theory. But anyway, okay? Okay. Antigens, right? Antigens. 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 Antigens, we said before, is a contraction of antibody generating, right? And it may be a mold, or it may be a fungus, or it may be a germ. It may be anything that makes me make antibodies. Anything that my body recognizes as foreign can be an antigen, okay? Antigen, right? A substance that can mobilize the adaptive defenses and provoke an immune response, okay? Most antigens are great big molecules, okay? And they cause this immune response. However, the big ones are called complete antigens, okay, complete. But there are some molecules that are tiny, okay, and these tiny molecules are so small they don't cause an immune response, and they are called haptens, okay? And those haptens, if they get hooked up with a big fat protein molecule, then guess what? They will cause an immune response. But since they're so small, they're called incomplete. Yeah, incomplete antigens. Incomplete antigens, right? But if they get hooked up with something big, then they will cause an immune response. But when they're so tiny, we call them haptens. Okay? Okay. Self-antigens. Okay? Right? We talked about the carbohydrate signature, also known as the glycocalyx and such. And that is how our body knows, yes, these cells belong to me, right? Okay? And such. Okay. Now, in a moment, we'll talk about immune system, where your immune system attacks itself. Okay? Forms antibodies against itself, as in an autoimmune disease, like rheumatoid, or MS, multiple sclerosis, or such. Right? Okay. Now, let's talk about active versus passive humoral immunity. Humoral immunity, right? Right? Active. Active humoral immunity, right? That just means this. I get exposed to the germ, and I catch the cold, and my body makes antibodies against it, and then I heal up from the cold, right? That's active because my body did. Okay? When B cells encounter antigens and produce antibodies against them, okay? Now, active can be naturally acquired, okay, as in an infection, right? but it can be artificially acquired, right? As in a vaccine, right? Artificially acquired, yes? Biden makes antibodies against chickenpox because I had the chickenpox shot. Well, not actually, I had chickenpox when I was a kid, but you young people probably had the chickenpox shot, right? Okay, so that's artificially acquired. That wasn't natural. You're walking down the street and you scrape your knee and you get chickenpox. No, that was, right? They took you to the clinic and they gave you the shot. But anyway, okay? Okay, vaccines contain, generally, I'm talking about the old style, I'm not talking about the mRNA vaccine, that's a totally different can of worms, but anyway, they generally will contain dead or attenuated viruses, okay? Dead virus, let me explain. The polio, if you take the polio vaccine, in America you get a dead virus, okay? It's a polio vaccine, but it's dead, okay? Now, in certain other countries, mainly Africa, if you get the polio vaccine, you'll get a different vaccine. One's called Salk, one's called Sabin. I can't remember the difference, forgive me. But anyway, and it's what's called attenuated. Excuse me. Attenuated means the germ is still alive, but it has been weakened. Okay, that's what attenuated means. Okay, right? Now, like I said, in America, you get the dead polio vaccine, right? Oh, by the way, I watched a video about a week ago, right? Guess what they found in the sewer system of London? Polio, live polio, right? And they traced it to one part of town. And that's where a lot of African immigrants live. And these African immigrants have probably had the polio vaccine, but they got an attenuated version, not the dead version, right? So it is possible that that could cause a problem there in England. But anyway, they do that. They're constantly in the big cities like that checking the sewage for certain germs and things. Okay? But anyway, I thought it was very interesting. Very interesting. So, but anyway, okay. Now, that's active. Now, passive, P-A-S-S-I-V-E, where you didn't do anything, right? Number one, mom to baby, right? If you breastfeed your children, your child is going to get some antibodies from you. And that will help that child from getting sick for the first however long you breastfeed, right? And it's passive because the baby didn't do anything. It's all mom, right? Number two, immunoglobulin. I-M-M-U-N-O-G-L-O-B-U-L-I-N. Immunoglobulin, okay? Right? There are immune chemicals floating around in our blood, and they are classified. One's called M, one's called A, D, G, E. They spell the word MAG, and it's I-M-M, I-M-G, okay? Like that, immunoglobulin G, okay? Now, when I was a kid, it was very common. If you were sick and you went to the doctor, he may give you antibiotic. And the next time, if you went back and you were still sick, he may give you more antibiotic and he'd give you a gamma globulin shot, which are antibodies. Okay, these are antibodies basically. Okay? And we list them as immunoglobulin M, immunoglobulin A, immunoglobulin D, like that. But anyway, we spell it MAG. So IgG is immunoglobulin G. IgA, immunoglobulin A, like that, okay? Number three, the third way you can get it passively, right, is antivenom, right? If you get bit by a rattlesnake and they take you to the hospital, they'll give you antivenom. And antivenom is going to hopefully save your life and such, but it's passive. You didn't form it. It's already made, right? And they give it to you to save your life very quickly. Yes? I have a friend, his son was bit by a cobra. Almost killed him, right? He loves snakes. He's always loved snakes. He has a deadly cobra. He got bit by the snake. And they put him on the airplane and flew him to Amarillo, and then I think they flew him to Dallas, right? And such. And he was telling the ER doctors, this is what happened, this is what I got bit by, and this is what you need to do for it, and such. And they got the antivenom from the Dallas Zoo, by the way. But anyway, and it's a neurotoxin, so he was little by little becoming paralyzed and could not speak and such. But they knew what to do, right? And they got the antivenom and gave it to him, and he came out of them, and it saved his life, right? Yes? And my friend tells a funny story, too, that the nurses are like, he was a bodybuilder guy, young, real stout, and the nurses were like, right? They had the gown on him, and the nurses were like, wow, he's got. That's what the nurses said. But he was paralyzed. He couldn't say anything. But it's funnier when my friend tells it. Botulism, antitoxin, botulism. Be careful what you say to patients or around patients, even if you think they're asleep. Antitoxin. Botulism, antitoxin. Okay? Right? That's another way. It'll protect you from botulism. If you get botulism, they'll give you this antitoxin so you don't die of botulism. Okay? And again, this is active. Your body forms it or makes it. Whether it's you got infected or you got a vaccine, and these are all passive. You get it from your mama in breast milk. You get a shot, IgG, gamma globulin is what they used to give when I was a kid. Oh, give a gamma globulin shot. Drop your pants. Antivenom or botulism toxin. Okay? Okay, let's take a break for a minute. We're doing really good on our time, but let's just take a break for a minute. Okay?
It's like on 60. It's different in our. It's that table up there. Is it?
Oh, it's
Yeah, around it.
oh,
The overview.
There we go. What?
What page is it?
No.